So, trying this for the first time, let's see how it goes. Talking to you for a little bit longer than a story on Instagram and talking without a script. And today I wanted to talk to you about why we have the impression that psychotherapy doesn't work. When I say it doesn't work, I mean the number of people who tend to say that it doesn't work or they have the impression. And usually we're talking about two types here, either the talking cure that doesn't work according to them, which means basically a clinical psychologist or any kind of therapist that uses the one-on-one kind of discussion, conversation type of therapy, or some kind of analyst, psychoanalysis, etc. And then the second type, which would be more the behavioralist kind of functioning, what they also call CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically training away something that is a problem, like, for instance, different kinds of phobia. All right, so the reason that people have the impression that it doesn't work is usually two things. Number one, they stay in therapy for a very, very long time, especially the talking cure kind, where they might actually go into therapy for several years. I would even say that psychoanalysts have an average of 5 to 10 years of analyzing, being on the couch, and that's normal. There are more reasons why you can have the impression that psychotherapy doesn't work when I talk about that talking cure version. And one very big reason is transference, which is basically the trust that we as a patient install in our therapist. And if the transference isn't working, then actually I will not be able to really deliver myself to my therapist. I will not feel the transformational part of the work, and I will not feel helped or seen or healed. And so that's quite common as well when people start to go to a therapist and then they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. The transference isn't working, and so they stop. And so they say that it doesn't work because nothing happened. And obviously, going for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times can be quite hard to have something happen anyway. But of course, if it wasn't the right person for you, then definitely you will not have that feeling. And that's probably why you stopped as well. And then if we would look into the other types of therapists, which would be then the more behavioral ones who actually don't really focus very much on why you feel a certain way or who you are and all of that, but more focusing on what is the symptom that is bothering you, what is your issue, and then we'll work on that. And usually it's in a way to work away a phobia. Very often it's a question of that, or just like to kind of recondition your system so to not react the same way anymore. One of the very typical ideas of this, or images that we can have, is of course Pavlov and his dogs. So it's a way to condition ourselves to react in a way depending on a situation, where Pavlov then what he was doing was that he was training his dogs that he would ring a bell and they would get food. And so the more he trained the dogs, the quicker it went for the dog to realize the link between the bell and the food. So after a while, he didn't have to actually put the food out. He would ring the bell and the dog would start to salivate, which is what they usually do when they see the food. And so that's a way how you work with more behavioral aspect of therapy. And the reason that this doesn't really work is, of course, that we are not really addressing the problem in its root. So we're treating a symptom, but the issue is that if there's something that's underlying to that issue, which there always is, then it would just pop up and manifest in different ways. One really unfortunate and very common types of behavioral kind of therapy that doesn't work is when someone is doing it to themselves actually, and they're wanting to lose weight or to just modify their body, either by becoming thinner, which is very common for young girls, for instance, or become bigger and stronger, which is maybe common for young boys, I was going to say, but actually all kinds of boys, I guess, as well, not only the youngs, and it's the same for the girls, not only the young ones. But it is in the teenage year that we start to see quite strongly these kind of traits. And so basically, there's a root cause, which isn't actually the root cause, but there's a symptom, which is I'm not happy with the way I look. So I'm trying to change my behavior. I am either starving myself, for instance, or I am also maybe overtraining myself. Now, the thing is, what we usually notice is that these behaviors, once they start to give results, because of course they give the results, well, the issue will still come back again. So it doesn't actually address the real issue that's an issue of identity, of course, that lies underneath, of not being enough and trying to modify that. Okay. One of the big issues on the talking cure side as well is, even though you might feel the transference and you might continue doing the therapy, not just stopping after a while, one issue is that, well, you can dig and dig and dig, and you might find all the good reasons, this is the way I am. Okay, now I'm understanding better. But what do I do with that? And so, in a lot of cases, you keep going to your therapist for years and on, and you keep talking about the same things. But there's not really a proper solution happening. Or even if they give you a solution, it can be really hard to apply it in your life. And then, of course, there's another part of that as well, which I've experienced as well, and that's the fact that you keep that narrative going, So it's also a way to justify that this is the way I am, and so you keep going back and you keep just rubbing it in even more. Okay, that's my issue. This is why I am the way I am, and then that becomes my identity, and then there's not even a use to try to change it. And I'm not saying that necessarily we need to change anything, actually. We are the way we are, and I think that the main thing is actually instead to come to the acceptance of that fact. But when there is an underlying issue that is causing us problems or blocking us, belittling us in our daily life as the adult that we become, then obviously if we could have the strategy to make a difference in that, to change that, then we would maybe also feel a little bit more relieved. And that's usually the reason that we actually go to see the therapist to start with. So the problem is that we're not approaching the human being in its totality, and we're not interested in accessing some of the things that can seem a bit new agey, maybe not so much today, but it used to be very seen as very new agey, and some kind of crossing between biology, neuroscience, psychology. And one of the big reasons of that is actually that there's always been a struggle between the fields of science, because actually we cannot really say that psychology or psychotherapy or psychiatry, even though it's based obviously on medicine, but that there's really science in the proper sense that we would use the word science, where it's proof and we can get results and we can test and always get the same, because we are actually handling a field that is completely not, we can't verify. I'm looking for a word, but I can't find it now. But we can't verify, actually, because each case is different. Now, this is the beauty. You see, we don't want to make psychology or therapy science in the sense that we use the word science with hard proof, because it's so organic. Naturally, we are. So it will always be a little bit different, and the outcome will always be a little bit different because there's too many variables that play in. And the reason that we're finding it hard then to mix the different fields together that touches the human is that most of it are based on the context that they were created in. So, for instance, a big part of what psychology presents for us today is based on theories of Sigmund Freud. Now, people who don't know much about it and who haven't read Freud, they usually have a very false idea of who Freud was and what his theories were, and very often misinterpreted. So it's valid what he said, and it's normal that we base a lot of the work still on what he created when he came up with the unconscious. But naturally, it was set in a context of the environment of Vienna, Austria, in the late 1800 and beginning of 1900 and so. And so the situation in the world, family-wise, society-wise, were very different to what it looks like today. Which is the reason, of course, that, for instance, we have no longer really the use of hysteria as a disease, and not necessarily only for women, as he would have more or less diagnosed it. But it's just like any of the religious scriptures, like the Bible or the Quran and such. We have to look at it from the perspective of when it was written, and then just use that with our eyes of today. Anyway, the reason that I find that mixing it all together, creating a holistic perception of ourselves, is more sustainable as a way to work on ourselves, is because when we start to, instead of looking into the way psychotherapy has been done, see it as a symptom of the environment that we're living in, we begin to look at the way we do things. So the symptoms, for instance, that we would actually go and see our therapist for, not as flaws or weaknesses within us, but instead of our strategies for survival that we've developed in order to adapt to our environment. Now, this is why when we have that look, we can start to instead, number one, we can start to actually intertwine the fields of biology and psychology, and also sociology, obviously, economy, and we will also then have a holistic view, because all of those fields will then explain how we have the symptom depending on the way that we'll look at ourselves in the context that we have been brought into, the environment, the social, economical, etc. environment, religious as well, but also our preferences in general. And if we actually had the option of stating our preferences, the famous word of boundaries, what we put into our body, what we eat, which will also have an influence depending on all these aspects, and how much and when we eat, and the way we choose to present ourselves. And so when we have this more holistic approach to the way we deal with things, and that we can see these symptoms that we need therapy for, or that we go and seek someone for, as strategies that we came up with in order to deal with whatever the environment was giving us or throwing at us, well, it will also empower us, because actually most of the time, even though it's much less that way now, there is a shame in seeking help. There is a shame in admitting to the symptoms that we have. And it's just the same way with addiction in itself. Just addiction in itself is a strategy to cope with something that we cannot control, something that is coming from the outside. So, number one is approaching ourselves holistically will make us understand why we do the things we do. Because it is a strategy that we've developed ourselves in order to survive. Now, once we have that, and so we feel a little bit better about ourselves as well, because not feeling good about yourself is not actually going to be helpful in any way. You know that somewhere. Then we can start to investigate in who we truly are. So that means filters, take them away, one by one of these things, these narratives, these symptoms, these ideas. Stilling the mind, actually. Getting to know ourselves is happening through the stilling of the mind, because when we become quiet, that's when we start to actually let things come to the surface. So by stilling the mind, we start to interrogate ourselves and inquire in who we are. All right, you know where I'm going with this. And as we do that, we become very aware. Now, change can only happen with awareness. And this is the reason, of course, that the behavioralistic therapies of reconditioning don't last, just like some types of hypnosis, depending on, but won't last as well, because we actually need to be actively aware of what we're changing or what we're doing in order for the change to happen, in order to make a change. So we still our mind in order to start to actually become familiar with what's going on in there, becoming aware of who we are. And then from there, the active change actually happens. And then, of course, naturally, because our mind and our body functions with familiarity, what we need to do is to have regularity when we create the strategies to counter the symptoms. Can you see where there's a self-power in that, and where there's a much more sustainable part in changing the behavior when we come from a place of conscious movement. Conscious movement meaning taking action of what I am aware. All right, so that was just a few words that I had. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's almost 20 minutes soon. So yeah, we'll see. Hopefully you'll get to see some of the very nice environments from the tropical Bali in the next videos, but I thought I'd just start with this one here today. All right, see you soon.